Hi everybody, welcome to October. It's Erika of the Neckline podcast and Grapefruit and Gardenia Designs. If you're watching this on Tuesday, October 1st, my vest pattern is finally out. I'm going to stand up super quickly and show you, but I took a picture because I know I'm not in a good position to really show you. But here it is. I love it. I needed some space after I designed it and knitted so many different versions and did the grading out, 10 sizes for the first time myself. And it's been a long process. So those of you who watch the podcast know that it's been a long process, but it has been 100% worth it. I'm so excited to share it with you, to share some of the yarn behind it, a little bit of the story behind it. And also how much that working on the grade to have a truly size inclusive pattern that fits everyone well was just so gratifying to go through in the end. So thanks for joining me today. If you do like the podcast or my patterns, please consider liking and subscribing to help other people find us. We are akin to sitting around a local yarn store table. And I know not everyone has access to that, or even if you do have access to it, you certainly don't 7 nights or 7 mornings a week. Maybe you do. Maybe you're really lucky. But many of us are also watching these podcasts from home as an extension of our knitting groups that we meet with in person. So thanks for joining me today. I hope that you're doing great. I had to try recording outside. I'll keep my fingers crossed for construction and landscape noises because it's just so beautiful. And we know here in New England, we do tend to have longer winters and the fall can just be great. And I thought, why not try to record outside today? So I have my microphone. Hopefully the sound is good. Maybe a few ambient noises, some bugs, some birds, but a little nature, right, is always good for the soul. So Rosalind Vest. I'm going to tell you about the design. I will give you a code, but I'll put that code in the pattern on Ravelry as well for a launch discount. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what has become very important to me, which is the yarn choices that we make when we're knitting. And as always, I want to be inclusive not only from a size perspective, but from an economic perspective, an accessibility perspective. And so, we're all trying our best all the time, probably not hitting every single place that we can in terms of inclusion, but trying very hard. And so in addition to the size inclusivity, I will be posting a separate list of alternative yarns to use that include, a number of different choices there so that people can find what is the best fit for them, whether you are looking in your stash at what you might have or looking at purchasing new yarn. So let's start with the vest and the name, Rosalind Vest. How did I come up with it? Well, one of the things that I wanted to pay tribute to this is my first garment design, but I assure you I have worked very hard on it and I have worked with a professional tech editor, testers, yarn companies. So I am very confident in it, as well as it being my first design that I'm proud of in terms of garments. So what did I want to do? I wanted to recognize my grandmother. Now, both of my grandmothers knitted, and if you've watched the podcast or other interviews I've done, you know that. But my grandmother, who is my memory of her always knitting. Her name was Priscilla. She went by Mabel, by my grandfather, and she also had the connection to Martha's Vineyard. So our family connection that's now at least 5 generations, but I think probably more than that, that went to Martha's Vineyard for all those years, which I'll kind of give a little side talk here because I do that sometimes and I go with some personal stories. But when I was on Martha's Vineyard this summer in the gingerbread cottages, which is where my family has been for that long, I had this thought that was pretty striking to me. And it was that's really the place to me that feels like home. And it's interesting because I never lived there year round, but on this podcast, we also talk about kindness quite a bit. We talk about the way that we treat each other. We talk about presence of place and things like that. So I grew up in a very small town, and that certainly felt like my hometown, if you will, right? I had that place I grew up. I went to high school. I still keep in touch with people. My parents still have a home there. And that's where I grew up. So that's my hometown. And then I went away to college in North Carolina And then I moved back to Boston, and I lived in every suburb like so many people do. And, I now live in Metro West. Well, the place that feels like home to me is Oak Bluffs. And so how does that tie into the vest? I promise you this isn't a total tangent, but it ties into my grandmother, who I wanted to honor as really the inspiration for learning to knit, and now this knitting journey and designing journey I never thought I'd be on, and the connection to a place like Martha's Vineyard and Oak Bluffs, and specifically the gingerbread cottages feeling like home to me, and somehow honor that in my garment design in this vest. So Rosalind is the heroine of Shakespeare's play As You Like It. Still not connecting the dots, right? Here we go. My grandmother's family cottage on Martha's Vineyard, they have names often, and hers was named As You Like It, spelled Azullikit. And so the connection back to my grandmother is that, Rosalind was a character, or is a character, who is very strong, who is seen as sharp and witty and resilient, beautiful and loyal. And those are all traits and values that I uphold, that I care about. And so I thought, you know what? Rosalind Vest. I also like the gender play with Rosalind and Ganymede, and how feminism can play into that, and a lot of things that are very topical and also historical things that we talk about when we talk about women. And this is sort of my third chapter, at least, in my professional and personal life for what I dedicate brain power to, is this designing. And I just thought Rosalind Vest really was a good name that sort of captured all of those things for me. So that's why I named it. And the other piece of it is the thorn stitch. So there's slip stitch color work at the bottom. Some people will call it mosaic color work. This thorn stitch here that you see, thorns are also really seen as something that can protect you. And so this idea that there's this band of thorn stitch around here, and they're often used in literature. Sorry, my chair is squeaking a little bit. Those are all the things that went into naming the vest. Some of you probably don't care about any of that, but to me, back to the reasons why I design, there's either an artistic expression, something about seeing if I can do it, what drives me to design. I'm not just cranking out patterns. One, that's not the way that I work, at least at this point in my life. Not to say it wouldn't be at some point, but there's a lot that goes into them. And so for me, sort of that idea of the thorn stitch and all this coming together with the meanings and home and my grandmother, that's why I named it. So let's get down into the nitty gritty of what people who don't care about any of that might still care to know about the vest: construction, yarn, gauge, other pieces. So again, it's October, right? I'm recording this on September 30th, but let's say you're probably watching it in October. One of the things we have to love about a vest is we don't have to knit sleeves. Isn't that great? This is also a bulky weight vest. Now, it can be knit in an Aran weight as well, because as we know, and we've talked about on other podcasts, gauge and yarn weight, there's some breadth to that conversation that we don't always talk about. Things aren't just bulky or just Aran or just fingering. There's two considerations. There's the yarn weight and there's the gauge. And those both play into, is something a bulky something? Is it an Aran? Is it a worsted? Is it a sport, a DK, so on. So the vest is Aran to bulky weight. It is a gauge of 14 stitches by 20 rows in 4 inches squared or 10 centimeters squared. And the sizes that you can knit it in of the garment, not your body, but the garment, range from a 32-inch full circumference to a 68.5-inch circumference, which is 81.5 centimeters to 174 centimeters. So, also a little bit of flexibility. Knitting is stretchy. You might knit this in a 13.5 stitch gauge or a 14.5 stitch gauge. And we know our knitting's going to stretch. We know that even if we do a huge swatch and block it, when we actually do the knitting, sometimes there are little variations. So if you're looking to make it just a little smaller or just a little bigger than one of the sizes, you can play around with your gauge a little bit there as well. And in terms of needle size, you want to use the needles that's going to get the gauge that you want and create the fabric that you want. So one of the things is, this is my version in Brooklyn Tweed Arbor Lodge, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and that's the yarn I'm publishing in. I knitted this one on a US 10 for the main body and a US 9 for the trim. I knitted another one in a different yarn and I knitted it on a US 10 and a half. So it's not just the knitter, it's also which yarn, right? You're going to get different gauges with different needles, with different yarns, and you want to come as close to the pattern gauge as you can and understand any variation in your gauge and how that will affect your finished product. It doesn't mean you can't knit it at a different gauge, but you need to know what it's going to do and what kind of garment it's going to create and what kind of fit. Stitches, this way, widthwise. Rows and rounds, lengthwise. And yes, rows and rounds do matter. They are, you can have a slight difference, but you need to know where you're gonna watch for things. So when you're knitting something like a vest, and in this case it's a top-down vest, some of it is knit flat to the underarms, and then some of it is knit in the round from the join at the underarms to the bottom. And so row gauge will matter, and in some places it's written with how many rows you do so that your two sides match here, for example. And rather than saying to knit to a length, you don't want to have them out of whack. So there'll be some that are written the number of rows you need to do. Other sections will be knit to a certain length. So there's a little more flexibility when it's knit to a length than when it's knit a certain number of rows in terms of how it matches row gauge. If you have questions about that, pop it below and I will try to answer them in a future episode. But just know that while you can have differences, there are certain places that will matter more than others. And you want to be able to do the math to know where that will happen. Okay, working through all of my notes here. We already said it's a seamless top-down vest. Let me tell you a little bit more about the construction. So you start by casting on stitches at the back neck here. And then you're knitting flat, and at first you're shaping the shoulders. So probably better to just pop in a picture here, but let me also show you quickly. The seam is slightly off center, so you can actually see my shirt seam and how that would go right. Well, when I lean, it's funny, but what you'll see is that this has tailored shoulders, so they actually fall down your back just a little bit, so they don't sit right at the top of your shoulder. And that's a very popular style that's coming up a lot more. Again, you'll see it in a lot of ready-to-wear clothing, and you'll see it more and more in patterns again. And I think I want to say I first saw it maybe with Coco Knits and the way that they show you how to do it, but now it's in a lot of patterns, and it just kind of sets it back a little bit so that it's not right at the top of your shoulders. And so once you cast on, you shape the shoulders, you start knitting flat, and you knit flat until you get to the underarm. And then what you're going to do is come to the front, and you're going to pick up stitches along that tailored shoulder, and you're going to start knitting down. And that's flat as well. And you're going to pick up stitches on the other side and knit flat. And then those two are going to join at the bottom of the neckline. I'm going to also tell you about ways you can modify the neckline. Once these two are joined, you're still knitting flat, flat, flat until the underarms. Now you're joining in the majority of this from underarms all the way to the bottom where there's the split hem. Right before the split hem, you're knitting in the round. So all of the mosaic or slip stitch color work is knit in the round, and the majority of the body, right, from your underarm join until the split hem. And obviously a split hem needs to be knitted flat so that you have the front and the back. And there's a little bit of extra wiggle room there around your hips, which I really like. And I like that whether it's, sometimes I don't do it, sure. But I like it for cropped versions. I like it for longer versions or ones that sit right at your hips. It just gives you a little bit more room. And I have a little bit more room in my hips. So I like it. Let's see, the tailored shoulder I mentioned. Okay, let me mention this pattern comes with addendum in the back. And I did it for 2 reasons. Well, maybe 3 reasons, probably more than that. But let's start with the main reasons I did it. I love to do it because one of the things I love to do is to help with education and knitting. I am always still learning. And I always think when I was a newer knitter, or even an intermediate, or even now, what would I want to learn in a pattern rather than having to know it already when I approach it. And one of the things is, how do I modify a neckline? How do I look at the placement where something is on the body, and how would I change it? Help me get ahead of my thinking and not have to dig into a pattern and figure it out. Now, it is important that as we learn, we do more of the digging on our own in order to customize patterns. But this being a bulky vest, I want it to be accessible to beginners and also to have people get an end result that they're really happy with. So here's what's in the addendum. One is how to make this neckline deeper. Now you'll see here, it's a crew neck and it's a comfortable crew neck. I do have a smaller neck. So for me, it's very comfortable as it's written in the Brooklyn Tweed Arbor Lodge yarn. Some people know that they want it deeper immediately. Now, one thing that I learned when I was learning about size inclusive grading on a deeper level is that one of the decisions right now, one of the pieces of guidance right now is that a designer isn't necessarily asked to make a decision for someone who's wearing a size that's along the whole continuum of sizes. So if I have a person who has a 28-inch bust or a person who has a 68-inch bust knitting this vest, the guideline, if you will, right now, is that the way I'm showing the neckline should be the way that it looks regardless. I should not assume that because someone has a 68-inch bust, they're going to want a lower neckline, or assume that if they have a 28-inch bust, they don't want a lower neckline. Now, sometimes we learn in practice, we might learn 95% of people knitting the size 68 do want it, and 95% of people knitting the size 32 to fit a 28-inch bust don't want it. So we may get to a point where we want designers to make that guidance for us, or we may not. And right now, the way that this pattern is written is if you knit it and you look at the schematic, it's going to show you how the neckline is, and it's going to be consistent across the grade. I feel like from experience and from my test knitters, many people want a lower neck. And so I put an addendum in, and that addendum will tell you how to make a lower neck. And in fact, a number of my test knitters used that addendum, used it successfully, made notes in their Ravelry projects, and you can see that. And it's really not hard at all, especially in a bulky yarn. It's often the case that you'll just do 4 additional rows. So right side, wrong side, right side, wrong side, and then do the next step. One place it could get a little bit trickier is if you go down far enough that you're going to be shaping the neckline and the underarm at the same time, but it will even flag that for you when you read the addendum. If you're not into modifications and you're happy with the schematic, you can pretend that addendum doesn't exist. But if you'd like a little hand holding on how to move the neckline down, it is there for you. That's addendum 1. And then there's another piece to it. And that's because what I did is I made a decision as a designer where I wanted the thorn stitch color work to start. And what I liked is I liked it just a little bit above your natural waist. So if I put my hands on my hips, you'll sort of see it's right above the natural waist. You might not like that. You might want it higher. You might want it right under your bust. You might want it lower. You might have a bust that falls in a different place. Your widest girth might not be your bust, right? You might not have breasts. Now, the pattern is written in sizes 7 to 10. It will tell you where stitches are added because it is written for people either with breasts or with their widest girth further down than their underarm. And it's written so that more stitches are distributed there. So this is what I mean about a lot went into this pattern and the grading of it, and not just getting it so it was graded to those sizes, but getting it so that as much as possible I could take as much information as I had from different designers, different books, different resources, and try to make this as accessible to the most bodies as I could. And if you look back over the podcasts I did this summer, you'll see a couple where I talked just about this, about how to empower knitters for making your own modifications, and how I did so much work in the grading of this pattern and trying to make sure that the increases worked well, and that the fit worked well for the whole grade. And again, I've probably said it, but I'm really happy to report that the thing I am probably the most proud of with this pattern is that all of the test knitters, from the smallest size to the largest size, reported that they were very happy with the fit, and that just made everything feel worth it. So thank you, test knitters. Thank you so much for doing that, and for sharing pictures of it on your body. Not everybody is always comfortable doing that, but let me tell you, from a designer's perspective, you are benefiting the whole knitting community by doing that. And I can't thank you enough and tell you how appreciated you are. And I hope that people will continue to test knit many sizes for all the designers out there, so we can all continue to learn and grow and make the best patterns that we possibly can. All right. Let's see, I've talked about, I didn't tell you there's a little detail here. There's a little tiny, see this? You don't have to do it if you don't like it, but it's a little purl section that goes down both sides and sort of gives you a little cinchy, pinchy in. I don't know, I like it, but you don't have to do it. You can just knit stockinette straight through. But if you do like it, sort of gives you, it's not really a faux seam, and it's not really like cinching in at the waist, but it's just enough so that sometimes if that feeling of like your sweater can kind of bell at the bottom or really swing out, it just gives it just a little bit of a hug in there. And if you're wearing it with less ease and your body's pushing it against it, it won't pull in too tight. It will be still very flexible like knitting is. Okay, let's talk yarn. We all love yarn, right? Let's talk yarn. So when I first designed this, I used a yarn that I had gotten at a fiber festival by hand dyer, and it was Targhee wool. And it was a bulky Targhee wool, but kind of felt more of like the Aran to bulky. And I fell in love with the Targhee wool. And this was not a yarn that was either widely accessible even when it was available, and then it became that the base was something that the hand dyer couldn't get. So I had written the pattern, and I was committed to this pattern. And I thought, I need a yarn partner. And I scoured the internet. And if you have watched my interview with Melissa Littlefield, if Melissa's watching this, she'll get a good laugh. Melissa Littlefield of Knitting the Stash, we talk a lot about the hunt for yarn, right? Fiber festivals, but let's say you don't have access to fiber festivals. Where do you start looking? I went on Google. And I said, Google, please tell me who's got Targhee wool, because I'm really in love with it now. And so often, right, this breed-specific notion, it's not new, it's old, but it's new again. Everything old is new again. And I can't go to every fiber festival looking for this. So who has yarn that's accessible, responsible, and Targhee? Please tell me. And I came up with a really small handful of producers, and I reached out to them. And again, as an independent designer who is not a big name designer, I am so appreciative of the ones who reached back out to me, and there were more than one, and really they were just wonderful. And so what I ended up deciding, timing wise, after I did swatches, working with people, I went with publishing in Brooklyn Tweed Arbor Lodge. As you can see, American Targhee wool. They are just an amazing company, and we as knitters owe a lot to them, and they depend on us. So it's a beautiful relationship, and I am just so impressed with the way that they responded to a small independent designer with a picture and a paragraph about why I cared so much about finding a responsible producer of targhee wool, and here we are. I have what I think is a gorgeous piece that now, I mean, I couldn't be happier wearing this. I'm going to have to put it aside so that I don't wear it out before I wear it and show some people at festivals, at trunk shows, at my local yarn shop, because I'm loving it. Maybe I should just wear it, follow my own advice, don't keep it in a drawer, just wear it. It's perfect weight for today. I know bulky can sound intimidating sometimes, but you know, it's a layer piece. So I'm nice and cool here, and I'm nice and warm here, and I'm gonna be at a festival this weekend, and I think it will be wonderful. I think when you're in, you know, going from air conditioning to outside, it can be great. All winter, you can put a heavier piece under here, you can put a lighter piece under, you could put short sleeves under it if you wanted to. And so don't be afraid of the fact that it is a, you know, in this case, it's actually labeled chunky weight. As we've said, don't dwell on how it's labeled. Knit it up, try the gauge. Do you like the fabric? Is it on the needle that's giving you the pattern gauge? That's what ultimately matters. So you want to start your search for this vest in the Aran chunky, bulky category. You don't want to go to super bulky unless you're going to really be confident in your math and playing around with things. And then it's entirely possible, but you know, you don't want too dense of a fabric either. You want the fabric to move a little bit and have some stretch to it. And you probably aren't going to go down to a worsted. Maybe you've got a very heavy worsted. Maybe you're looking for more of that look that's open. And if you are, that's okay. But just, you know, the more you go down, the more that's what your fabric's going to be like. So the Arbor Lodge will tell you right on it. Okay, it says chunky weight 125 yards or 114 meters per 100 grams. Now also keep in mind that if you're looking at a worsted weight, a worsted spun yarn, which this is, compared to a woolen spun yarn, your yardage in your weight is going to be different because of how much air is in here. You want to think about the gauge, but if you're looking at a worsted spun yarn, even I with all this experience, I'm sometimes second guessing myself, then you can compare yarns that are in that range of 125 yards to 100 grams. If you're looking at a woolen spun, you're going to be looking at a different thing there, okay? So you're not wrong. It's going to be a different yardage for the weight. And if you're looking at an Aran, you're going to have a different yardage to the weight. But if the gauge works and the material, the fabric works, you're okay. So I just want to put that out there. If you have questions, again, pop them below. I will do my best to answer. So it will give you a gauge range on here, and it's 3 to 3.5 stitches to 1 inch. Well, the gauge of this pattern, as I said, is 14 stitches. So that's right in that sweet spot. And this says on a US 10 to US 11. And again, I knitted this version with the US 10 for the main body and the US 9 for the twisted rib trim. So the yarn specs here, it is worsted spun, as I already mentioned. It is 7 plies, okay? So once you're doing this, you can absolutely knit it in a 2-ply. If you have a 2-ply and your heart is set on it, go for it. I would like to put a plug in if you're shopping for new yarn to look for 3 or more plies. Do you need 7? No. Is 3 great? I think so. I think so for a lot of reasons. It's not just because it's a round yarn, right? So you'll hear about 3 or more plies for cables, and that's certainly the case. But I also just really like how it wears for garments. Depending on the tightness of how it's spun, that's also a factor. But, you know, I like it for a little bit of a lack of pilling. I like it for other, you know, for a lot of reasons. And it will tell you right in here too, the micron count, which is 23.5 microns. Now the micron count, I'm actually going to do another episode because I know this is getting long and I'm not going down this rabbit hole now. But micron count and breed specific is something I'm going to revisit and tell you a little story about visiting a knitting mill recently and conversations that I had. So the micron range is tied to breeds, okay, because you have breeds that are going to be coarser or finer, but the micron count is really important when you're thinking about softness and you're looking at a breed and you're wondering, do I want to knit in this breed? Is it going to be next to skin soft, especially if you're ordering it online and you can't find it? So 23.5 microns, let me tell you, this is next to skin soft. Of course, I'm not really going to be wearing this one that I can think of next to skin, but you feel it up here, so you're going to feel it. And that is going down toward, the finest wool ranges where you're looking at like 18 to 21 microns for very, very soft wool, but that's going to pill more too. So to me, this is a sweet spot in the construction of the yarn, as well as the micron count, the breed, every single piece of it. I think this is a fabulous yarn to use not only for accessories, but for garments. So if you're looking at knitting a bulky garment, check out Brooklyn Tweed Arbor Lodge. The other thing about it, and this is where it's important that when we have the ability financially to support companies that are supporting us as people, as the human race, as a community, the earth, which we would like to, and let me take this moment to say, I am thinking about everyone who was affected by the hurricane in the United States this weekend. I went to school in North Carolina. I've been to Asheville, and it's devastating. And it's such a huge artistic community that's there. That, of course, first and foremost, I'm thinking about them as people, and second, as an arts community. So, when you think about buying yarn, there is an impact. There's an impact from our textiles and from choices like what kind of yarn you buy. And yes, you're one person, but if you have the ability to support a company that's doing well and doing good, please consider doing it. Okay, because those textiles are impacting our earth and our climate change in a way that we haven't had enough conversations about. Get off my soapbox. But, if you can, it's an investment in our future. So let's just look at what they take the time to put on the inside of their label, right? Because it probably costs them a lot extra money to print this. And that's because it's important. Committed to the U.S. textile production. The origin of this fiber is Montana and South Dakota. It's scoured in South Carolina, spun in Maine, dyed in Philadelphia, finished in Philadelphia, and designed in Portland, Oregon. It says, we love wool. We took everything you love about arbor, so arbor is the DK version, and made it bigger. Springy, soft American Targhee wool is combed smooth and worsted spun into a pillowy, plush 7-ply yarn with crisp stitch definition and wear everywhere durability. I will attest to that. In my experience so far, I agree. It does say alternate skeins for best results. I'm going to confess, I didn't. But if you don't have the same dye lot, obviously, do that. If you do have the same dye lot, get out in natural light, look in artificial light, see how you feel. And if you feel you need to alternate, it may also be that you can actually make it through big chunks. I'd have to go back and look. I want to say I used either 3 or 4 skeins of the main color. So if you have one on the back, one on the front, and one through the mosaic, you can also get away with a lot more. But their advice is to alternate skeins. If you don't know the when you knit in one color for a round and then another, it's not just alternating skeins, not cyclical knitting. Oh, I'm drawing a blank. That's embarrassing. Helical knitting. Okay, good. I put a little pressure on myself. Helical knitting, if you're looking for a technique to alternate skeins. Look that up if you don't know it. And then, they give you tags of how to share your projects. And of course, I would always love if you share your Rosalind Vest. And if you're knitting it in Brooklyn Tweed, please share. So, real quickly before I wrap up, I want to mention 2 other yarns because we're looking at some very, very different things. And please keep in mind that I will have that full list with many more accessible yarns, many different price points, many different options. But I'm going to mention 2 others right now. One is because I did do another sample in this yarn. This is a dyer in Idaho. And so the Brooklyn Tweed has a gorgeous, gorgeous classic color palette. So if you like that, check them out. If you say, I really want to do it, I'm not doing it in the classic, more solid colors. I want a hand-dyed look, and that's what I want. Check out So Happy Jane Yarn, Heather Best. I've mentioned her before. I'm going to tell you why I think she's a great person to check out. And also, she is going to have a dye to order for her bulky weight yarn coming up, which she tends to do as we get towards those colder months. And she has a 3-ply, which is one of the things I mentioned. Hers is merino. It's scrumptious bulky. And the other reason I bring her up is because she does perfect pairings. So if you love that hand-dyed yarn look, one of the things is we so often buy a skein and then we say, what are we going to pair it with? I bought it. It was beautiful. I loved it. And now I don't know what to match it with. So Heather, as many other dyers do, but Heather has a real knack for these perfect pairings. And she will do like a speckled or more of a variegated, and she'll pair it with a tonal, and they go together beautifully. So I imagine she'll probably have recommendations for how to pair it. But if she doesn't, you can look at any of her pairings that she offers through her club that have now been released to the public, because the club is more than a year old. So hopefully I'm getting that right, Heather. I believe that the pairings that are older are no longer exclusive to the club. And this was actually one, and I'll put a picture in of me wearing it as well. This was a tonal that I think she's called Herb Garden now that it's been released to the public. This I actually cheated a little bit, and I paired it with one that she had the following month, but she's designed them all to work together. So this one was the October color a couple of years ago, and this was the September one. But the one that this went with was this turquoise blue that was exceptional. And this one, if you look at my September garden cowl, this one went with like a reddish orange that was also exceptional. So she's got any color of the rainbow here that you're going to want in a tonal, and she'll match it with a speckle for you. And so this one I actually knitted on a 10.5 needle. So this is where I'm telling you, for me to get gauge in a different yarn, I use a 10.5 needle. You might use an 11, you might use a 9. Just make sure you're getting gauge. And I don't know, there's something else about it. My yardage shows, your yardage will probably vary a little bit. So the yardage in the pattern is for the Arbor Lodge, and I feel like it is generous. So I feel like any yarn you use should be that amount or less, unless you're going with a very different weight yarn. But if you're going with that bulky, chunky yarn, the yardage that's in the pattern should cover you. If you're ever like really close and you want to put in the extra skein, do it. But we all know what it's like to try to purchase the right yardage. I try to give you very good estimates as much as I can. So here it is. Oh, that was the other thing. I knew there was something else. I'm glad I remembered. Right here, on this one, I decided to follow my own addendum and modify it and make the neck a little bit lower. So I actually did, and I put in my project notes, which you'll see on Ravelry. I'm Nitty Elf 40. I'm not only the designer, I have my project pages in there, and you'll see that I did put 4 extra ones back and forth here. So we are having a little bit of work done today. I told you our hot water heater blew. We're getting that fixed up, and I might have to pause for just a second. Okay, I'm back. My hot water heater's here. Yay. So I just told you about So Happy Jane yarn. There's one other yarn I want to highlight for you. And it's because I haven't seen it yet. I'm excited to, but there is going to be a sample also at New Hampshire Sheep and Wool for all of you farm yarn enthusiasts. You know that one of the pledges I made with my designs, in addition to looking for ethical companies and responsibly produced wool, is to also seek out small farms. And you might not be able to buy all of these online. You might not be able to access these for any number of reasons. They might not simply have the inventory. But at Vermont Sheep and Wool this weekend, there's a sample that I haven't seen yet, and I'm so excited to see it, in Catherine Knox's wool from Hands and Heart Farm. And again, if you saw my interview with Melissa Littlefield, you'll know I mentioned there that I thought she had a really unique product in that she had a farm yarn, bulky weight, 3 or more plies, and hand dyed. And so I wanted to take the opportunity. Obviously, I've sung the praises of Brooklyn Tweed. You know, you've heard me talk about So Happy Jane yarn before, and that one is a merino, and it is a 3-ply, and it is hand dyed. So those are going to create 2. Hey, knit yourself multiple vests. You don't have to choose. Make 2, make 3, make them for your friends. Anyway, Hands and Heart Farm in Vermont is going to have a sample in their farm yarn this weekend at Vermont Sheep and Wool. And hopefully I'll get some pictures of that too. So I'll be able to share it, not on this podcast, but just social media and in the future. And so I think those are 3 really distinct offerings of yarn. I have a lot more I would love to sing the praises of, but I'm going to focus on those 3 for today. I'll talk about more in the future that I either swatched or connected with or have seen, and they are probably in that list I'm going to share as well with the pattern. So please take the time to check it out, see if it's the pattern for you. One of the other plugs I'll give for it is you don't have to knit sleeves. Did we already say this, right? So it's October. Are you feeling a little FOMO on a Rhinebeck sweater? Whether or not you're going, you can knit a bulky weight vest, no sleeves, 14 stitch gauge, I'd say nearly every size, and this doesn't have to do with being a fast knitter or a slow knitter or anything in between, right? We're all knitters. You can knit it, and you can probably knit it by Rhinebeck. So I would like to just say thank you. Thank you for checking out the pattern. Thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoy knitting it. If you do, if you don't, but you think it's somebody else's jam, help spread the word, and tag me if you knit it. Rosalind Vest, hashtag. I'm so not cool. Anyway, hopefully you're laughing by now between the hot water heater, the renovation project, and a million other things, because life is life. I'm just going to laugh at myself. Okay, so knit kindly, live kindly, and I'll catch up with you again soon.